I was sitting at the corner table of Harlow's, one of those boutique hotel lobbies that doubles as a coffee bar, the kind with marble countertops and leather chairs that cost more than my first car. My husband had gone to the front desk to extend our reservation, and my brother had stepped outside to take a call. I was alone, stirring my espresso, watching the afternoon light cut across the floor in long gold strips. That was when the man sat down across from me. He didn't ask. He just pulled out the chair, lowered himself into it like he'd been expected, and set a small cream-colored envelope on the table between us. He was older, maybe 60, silver at the temples, wearing a gray jacket that looked expensive but understated. His eyes were calm. That was the part that unsettled me most. Not nervous, not hurried. Calm, like someone delivering mail he'd been carrying for a very long time. "Mrs. Calloway," he said quietly. I hadn't gone by that name long enough to stop flinching at it. "I don't know you," I said. "No, but I know enough about what's happening to you that I think you should take this." He slid the envelope an inch closer. "Don't open it here. Don't open it in front of your husband. Wait until you're completely alone, tonight, if possible." He paused. "It matters more than you know right now." I looked at the envelope, then back at him. "What is this?" "A beginning," he said. And then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the side exit without looking back. My husband came back 2 minutes later with a key card and a smile. "They upgraded us," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Third floor suite. Not bad, right?" I smiled back. I said, "Not bad at all." The envelope was already in my purse. "My name is Claire Harmon. I'm 31 years old. I restore and authenticate antique furniture for a living. I run a small consultancy out of Charleston, South Carolina, mostly for estate sales, auction houses, and private collectors who need to know whether the Louis XVI armoire they just paid $40,000 for is real or a very good lie. I'm good at spotting fakes. I've always been good at that. Which is maybe why, looking back, I should have caught it sooner. I met my husband at an auction preview 18 months ago. He was standing in front of a Chippendale secretary desk, running his fingers along the dovetail joints with the kind of focused attention that I'd only ever seen in people who genuinely understood old things. I thought that meant something. I walked over and told him the piece was a reproduction, good one, mid-century, but not what the house was claiming. He laughed and said he already knew. He just wanted to see if the room was full of people who could tell the difference. His name was Daniel Calloway. He was 38, ran a private equity firm out of Atlanta, traveled constantly, wore his confidence the way some men wear cologne. You noticed it before anything else. We were married 8 months after we met, in a small ceremony in the mountains. My brother gave me away. My best friend cried through the whole thing. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the room. I held the envelope in my lap for 4 hours that evening, while Daniel took a client call in the hotel bar downstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed with the bedside lamp on low and turned it over in my hands twice before I opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a small USB drive taped to the back of the envelope. The page had 6 lines on it, typed, no signature. "Your husband is not who he told you he is. His firm doesn't manage other people's money. It launders it. The USB contains documentation. There is a woman named Patricia Voss in Colombia who has been waiting 3 years for someone to find this. She worked for him. She tried to report it. She lost everything. Her number is at the bottom of this page. She will answer if you call." I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still for a long moment, listening to the air conditioning hum and the distant sound of Daniel's laugh drifting up from somewhere below me. I didn't cry. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. I didn't cry at all. I didn't plug in the USB that night. I was careful about that. I knew that if Daniel came back to the room and the laptop was open with files on the screen, I'd have no way to explain it that he'd believe. So I tucked the drive into the inside pocket of my toiletry bag, folded the note into the lining of my winter coat, and when Daniel came back at 11:30 smelling like bourbon and Easy Charm, I told him I had a headache and went to sleep facing the wall. The next morning, I drove to my office alone. I have a small space above an antique dealer on King Street, 2 rooms, a work table, a good lamp, and a desktop computer that I trust more than my phone. I plugged in the drive and opened the first folder. It took me 40 minutes to understand what I was looking at. There were wire transfer records. Dozens of them, structured in amounts just under $10,000 so they'd avoid automatic reporting flags. Multiple shell companies, names that meant nothing to me: Burano Capital, Ashfield Holdings, Blue Meridian LLC. But the parent account running through all of them traced back, through 3 layers of incorporation, to a firm in Atlanta called Callaway Asset Group, my husband's firm. The second folder was worse. It was correspondence, internal emails between Daniel and a man identified only as MB. They talked about clients in code, but the pattern was unmistakable once you understood what you were reading. Money went in dirty. It came out clean, and the volume was not small. Over 4 years, the documented transfers totaled somewhere above $40 million. The third folder was Patricia Voss. She'd been Daniel's office manager for 6 years. There were copies of the reports she'd filed, first internally, then with her state's Financial Regulatory Board, then with the FBI field office in Columbia. There were responses, each one more bureaucratically dismissive than the last. There was a civil suit that had been thrown out on a technicality. There was a final document, a settlement agreement with a non-disclosure clause that she'd clearly been pressured into signing. She'd lost her job. Her professional references had been quietly destroyed. She'd spent 2 years working retail to pay her rent. I sat at my work table for a long time after that, looking out the window at King Street filling up with morning. Then I called the number at the bottom of the page. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was steady but careful, the way people sound when they've learned not to trust a phone call too quickly. I told her my name. I told her I'd received the envelope. There was a long pause. "Who gave it to you?" she asked. "I don't know." An older man. Gray hair, hotel lobby in Charleston. He sat down, left it, and walked away. Another pause. Was he wearing a gray jacket? Good fabric, not flashy? Yes. She exhaled slowly. "That's Arthur Benning," she said. "He used to be a compliance officer. He was at Callaway Group for about a year, brought in as a consultant, I think. He saw the same things I saw. He left quietly. I thought he'd disappeared." "He hadn't," I said. "No," she said. "I guess he hadn't." We talked for 2 hours. She told me everything: the accounts she'd flagged, the conversations she'd overheard, the afternoon she'd come back early from lunch and found Daniel in his office, reviewing a transfer summary with 2 men she'd never seen before and was never introduced to. She told me about the week after she filed the first complaint, when her computer was wiped remotely overnight. She told me about the calls she'd gotten from a lawyer she'd never hired, warning her that pursuing this could expose her to counter-litigation. "I had nothing," she said. "He had everything. That's how it works." "Not this time," I said, and I surprised myself by meaning it. I need to explain something about who I am because it matters for what happened next. I grew up watching my mother work 2 jobs to pay the mortgage on a house my father had mortgaged, without telling her, to cover debts she didn't know existed, for a life he built in parallel that she only discovered when the bank called on a Tuesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. She didn't fall apart. She got a job at a title company, learned real estate law from the inside out, and eventually became one of the most trusted closing attorneys in our county. She used to say, "The only thing more dangerous than a liar is a liar who thinks you're not paying attention." I paid attention. I called a friend from law school, not a lawyer herself, but she was married to one who handled financial crimes. She listened to me for 20 minutes and then said very carefully, "Claire, you need to go to the FBI, not a local field office, the Financial Crimes Division. And you need to go without telling your husband, your brother, or anyone else in your life right now until you know who knew what." "My brother," I said. "He's known Daniel longer than I have." "I know," she said, which is why I said what I said. That was the hardest part to sit with. My brother Marcus had introduced me to Daniel at that auction preview. He'd been the one who vouched for him, who told me Daniel was one of the good ones, who'd stood beside him at our wedding and called him family. Either he didn't know or he did. I didn't ask him. Not yet. The FBI field office contact Patricia gave me was a special agent named Reyes. Sandra Reyes, Financial Crimes Division out of the Charlotte field office. She had the kind of voice that was professional, the way a locked door is professional, polite, complete, designed to give nothing away. I met her in a parking deck in Charlotte on a Thursday afternoon. I brought the USB drive, printed copies of everything, and Patricia's contact information. Agent Reyes looked through the documents without changing her expression once. When she finished, she looked up at me. "Mrs. Calloway," she said. "Harmon," I said. "I use my own name professionally. I prefer it now." Something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, but something close to respect. "Ms. Harmon, this isn't the first time your husband's name has come across my desk." She told me what she could, which wasn't much, but it was enough. Daniel had been under what she called preliminary review for 14 months. The problem was documentation. The shell structure was sophisticated enough that tracing ownership required a chain of evidence that kept going cold at the same junction point. What I was handing her, she said, was potentially the link they'd been missing. "The man named MB. In those emails," I said. "Do you know who that is?" She paused just a fraction of a second too long. "We have a theory. Is it someone I know?" Another pause. "We're not certain yet." I drove back to Charleston in the dark, hands steady on the wheel, thinking about my brother. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. I came home every evening. I cooked dinner. I asked about Daniel's day and listened to the answer. I laughed at the right moments. I slept beside him in our bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about Patricia Voss working a register at a hardware store after 6 years of doing everything right. Agent Reyes called me twice a week on a phone I'd bought with cash at a drugstore. She told me what she needed from me, which was mostly confirmation of dates and locations, times Daniel had been in certain cities, names of people who'd come to the house, the contents of a locked drawer in his home office that I'd always assumed held insurance documents and had never thought to question. I thought to question it now. The drawer held insurance documents, and beneath them, in a craft envelope, a second set of account statements that didn't match anything in our shared finances. I photographed every page on the burner phone and sent them to Agent Reyes. "That's the link," she told me that night. "That's what we needed." "What happens now?" I asked. "We move within the week," she said. "I need you to not be in the house when we do." She told me to go somewhere public, somewhere with people I trusted, and to stay there from 9 in the morning until she called. I drove to my mother's house 2 hours away. I sat at her kitchen table and drank her coffee and didn't tell her why I was there, just said I needed a quiet day. My mother has always understood quiet days. She didn't ask. Agent Reyes called at 11:47. "It's done," she said. He was at the office. We executed the warrant there and at the residence simultaneously. We also picked up his associate. She paused. "MB is Mitchell Brower. He's a commercial real estate broker out of Atlanta. They've been running the operation together for 6 years. Mr. Brower was also responsible for the pressure campaign against Patricia Voss." I set down my coffee cup. "She should know that," I said. "Patricia should hear that directly." "She will," Agent Reyes said. "We'll be in contact with her today. She's a material witness, and she'll be treated as one, not as a liability." I looked out my mother's kitchen window at her garden, at the hydrangeas she planted the year after my father left. "There's one more thing," Agent Reyes said. "Arthur Benning, the man who gave you the envelope. Yes, he came in voluntarily this morning, before the warrants. He wanted to make a formal statement. He said he'd been trying to find a way to surface the information for 2 years, but he was afraid going directly to the Bureau would result in the same outcome as Patricia's reports, buried under legal pressure before it could take root. He decided the best chance was to get it to someone with both personal standing and reason to act." "Me?" I said. "He did his homework," she said. "He knew who you were before Daniel did. He said he watched you authenticate a disputed piece at the Morrison estate sale in Savannah last year. He said, and I'm quoting his statement here, 'She's someone who understands the difference between what a thing appears to be and what it actually is. That's what this needed.'" I didn't say anything for a moment. "He was right," I finally said. The total amount traced through Callaway Asset Group came to just over $47 million across 6 years. A federal judge ordered full asset forfeiture. The shell companies were dissolved. Daniel's firm was placed in receivership. At sentencing, Daniel's attorney argued for leniency based on his charitable contributions and community standing. I sat in the gallery and listened and did not look at my husband at the defense table and did not feel anything that surprised me. He was sentenced to 14 years. Mitchell Brower received 11, with an additional count for witness intimidation related to the pressure campaign against Patricia. Patricia Voss attended the sentencing. I'd only seen her on a video call before that day. She was smaller in person than I'd imagined, quieter, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent years being very careful about what they show. We sat next to each other in the gallery. When the sentences were read, she exhaled once, slowly, and then she just nodded to herself, like something she'd long stopped expecting had finally, quietly arrived. Afterward, we stood on the courthouse steps in the October sun. 3 years, she said. Not bitterly, just stating it. It shouldn't have taken that long, I said. No, but it's done. The federal forfeiture proceeds, after legal costs and restitution to documented victims, included a significant remaining fund. Patricia's attorney filed a civil claim for wrongful professional destruction. It was settled before trial. I don't know the exact amount, but when I called her in December, she told me she'd signed a lease on an office space. She was starting over. What kind of work? I asked. Financial compliance consulting, she said, and laughed. A real one, short and surprised, like she hadn't expected to find it funny either. Arthur Benning sent me a letter in November. Handwritten, 3 pages, the penmanship of someone who'd learned to write before keyboards existed. He explained that he'd spent the better part of 2 years trying to find the right person, someone inside the situation who had both the access and the disposition to see it through. He apologized for the manner of the approach. He said he knew it was a shock and that he'd had no right to hand me that weight without warning. I wrote back. I told him there was nothing to apologize for, that I'd spent a long time thinking about what it means to know something and do nothing with it, and what it costs other people when that happens. I told him about my mother. I told him about Patricia. I told him that the hardest part had not been any of it, not the weeks of pretending, not the sleepless nights, not the day the warrants were executed. The hardest part had been the moment in the parking deck in Charlotte when Agent Reyes had paused just a fraction too long and I'd understood that my brother's name might be the next one I heard. It wasn't. Marcus genuinely hadn't known. He'd been used the same way I had. Daniel had cultivated him deliberately, used the friendship as social proof, as access, as cover. When Marcus found out, he called me and couldn't speak for almost a full minute. I let him sit in that silence. I didn't rush it. He asked me later why I hadn't told him when I first found out. I told him the truth, because I loved him too much to ask him to carry it, and because I hadn't been certain yet, and because some things you have to walk to the end of alone before you can let anyone walk back with you. He said he understood. I think he did. I still do the same work. I still sit at my table on King Street and look at old things and try to determine whether they are what they claim to be. I'm good at it. I've always been good at it. I think about Arthur Benning choosing me for that reason, not because I was brave or connected or positioned, but because he'd watched me stand in a room full of people and see clearly what most of them had decided not to look at too closely. He was right that it was what this needed. I hope he was right that it was what I needed too. I'm still working that part out. What I know is this: Patricia has an office now. Arthur gave his statement on the record. 3 years of damage can't be undone in a courtroom, but it can be witnessed there, and sometimes that's the first real thing. The envelope is still in the pocket of my winter coat. I've thought about throwing it away. I haven't yet. Some beginnings are worth keeping, even after the end.